Shalom everyone, Aaron Lipkin from Samaria, and I'm here with my Abba, Avi Lipkin, and we are on a very festive occasion. Every year, it's a tradition, our family, to come to a forest on Independence Day and celebrate this amazing day. And I think that Israel's Independence Day is not like the Independence Day of every country in the world, because there's no precedent to the fact that people that were exiled from their land for 2,000 years were able to return to their homeland and reestablish a sovereign country in their homeland. And so this is definitely a special Independence Day of a special country. And we all know that this is not a coincidence or something that it just happened. This is part of the fulfillment of the prophecies in the Bible. There's no other way of explaining it. So, we're here in the forest, and I think that many people would like to hear your thoughts about what's going on in the Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. So, what do you think the reasons are? Why is Russia invading Ukraine? I mean, we're all looking at it and we're saying, what's going on? Two Christian countries are attacking each other, something that we haven't seen in a long time.
It's not only two Christian countries. Russia and Ukraine used to be one people, really. It was 1,000 years ago. But the Russians and the Ukrainians are a brother nation. They are a Slavic nation. And the truth is, though, that since 1648, the Ukrainians were conquered by the Russians, after they had been conquered by the Polish, because the Polish also are a Slavic nation, and there were pretty bad relations between the Ukrainians and the Russians since 1648. And the worst part of it all, I would say, was the Stalinist government in the 1920s and 30s, where millions, perhaps tens of millions of Ukrainians and also Russians who objected to Bolshevism and communism were slaughtered by the Stalinist regime. They were starved to death and tortured by the Russian KGB, or it was NKVD at that time. So there are very, very hard feelings between the Ukrainians and the Russians for many, many centuries. Regarding Israel, the Jewish people indeed were exiled 2,000 years ago from the Holy Land. And one of the remarkable things about the Israeli Independence Day is that it comes the day after Remembrance Day. And the Remembrance Day commemorates the 24,000 people, soldiers, who were killed for the last 150 years fighting for the independence of the Jewish people, the creation or the resurrection of the Jewish state. A week ago, we celebrated, we mourned. Every year we mourn for the 6 million killed in the Holocaust. 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. The remaining 1 million, and most of them came to Israel. Today, what we're seeing in the Ukraine, and I know I should never repeat the word Holocaust, because there is no comparison between Russia-Ukraine war and the Nazi Holocaust. But on the other hand, war is a war, a horrible war. And what we see happening today is, I believe, fulfillment of prophecy. It's a very horrible fulfillment of prophecy, but Jewish people are people who are loyal to the countries in which they live. Jewish people do not want to leave. Jewish people like stability in their lives. And so the Jews in Russia who are still there used to be 5 million, but now there are only 500,000 Jews and people who are half Jewish, half Christian, and they all live together. 500,000 people who are entitled to move to Israel if they would like to. In the Ukraine, there are 150,000 Jews and mixed Jewish-Christian families who are also entitled to move to Israel. My point is that unfortunately, only through a war will the Jews and their Christian spouses and relatives be shaken enough to fall out of the tree and then to flee to Israel. And Israel actually, in spite of COVID, has received since last April, we're talking about a year now, we have received over 42,000 immigrants, most of which came from Russia and Ukraine. 1,000 came from Argentina, 4,000 came from the US, 4,000 came from France. But we received a very hefty amount of Jews and Christian relatives who came home as a result of this war in the Ukraine. I think we're going to see more. I've been receiving reports that many people from Russia, Jewish and Jewish Christian people, are taking advantage of the direct El Al flights from Moscow to Tel Aviv. Everybody was complaining that Israel should be boycotting Russia, but we made the right decision, I believe, not to boycott Russia, to keep our planes flying, our El Al airliners, to bring home Jews and Christians from the land, from Russia to the land of Israel. And what we see happening indeed is many tens of thousands of people in Russia are lining up to come home, because the Jewish people, maybe unlike the Russian non-Jews, the Jewish people are very international, very cosmopolitan, and in spite of the news blackout in Russia, I think many Jewish people understand what's really happening, and that the war with Ukraine is a war of aggression by the Russians. The Israeli government doesn't want to talk about it because we don't want to burn our bridges with the Russians. But there are hundreds of thousands of potential immigrants that could come to Israel from Russia. And a lot of these people are very successful in business or in their professions. These are the elites of Russia. And, I have nothing personally against Russia. I will say I'm very sad for Russia, because the Russian population is decreasing by about 500,000 every year. Many people who are in the high-tech or internet world understand that Russia is a dying country. The system in Russia is no longer communism, but it's still tyranny and despotism. And as a result, many people say we cannot develop lives in Russia. We need to leave, either go to Israel or go to the West. So the trains that are leaving from St. Petersburg to Finland are packed with refugees, people who are elites, very smart people in Russia. And they're leaving Russia because the life in Russia is too stifling under the dictatorship there. And of course, the planes coming home to Israel are specifically dedicated to the Jews and their Christian family members who want to move to Israel. So I think we will be seeing a tremendous move of Jews and Christians from Russia, from Ukraine, moving to Israel. You'll have to excuse the noise. This is a very happy day for us. The kids are with us in the forest. We just finished a wonderful barbecue. We spent 4 or 5 hours eating and drinking and just having a great time. So we're having a great time doing this little interview here now. But Russia today, and I pray for Russia. The Russian people are not a bad people. There is no such thing as a bad people. There are only bad systems. And Russia cannot return itself to civilized nations until the Russian people get their freedom and they develop a democratic system, something that never happened in 1,000 years. And so you have to remember that, in America, there was something that developed out of 1215 in England called the Magna Carta, where the autocratic powers of Prince John were curtailed by the aristocracy in England. By the way, the Magna Carta was a very anti-Semitic document because it expelled the Jews from England. The Jews supported Prince John. Prince John was very unpopular, and he was autocratic. So in Russia, you have had for 1,000 years autocratic dictators, whether it was Tsarist or communist or now Putinesque. And so we will be, I think we are going to be seeing the end of the period of Putin now in Russia. The question is, will he be removed and the government taken over by his cronies, or will we see some kind of a move towards democracy? And, I'm an American-born Jew, and I have a great appreciation for Western civilization and democracy. And, you look at the countries that broke away from the Soviet bloc, like the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, then Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, These countries, Hungary, all these countries now are democratic countries. They broke away from the Soviet Union. They joined NATO. These people are hungry and thirsty for freedom and democracy. The Western European countries, they're democratic. The Latin American countries have become more democratic, in spite of whatever problems there may be. The only dictatorships today in Latin America are Cuba and Venezuela, which are communist dictatorships. Even Africa today, with its problems, Africa, because of the high tech and the greater level of education, Africa is becoming more democratic in its own ways. So I'm a believer in democracy. The only countries where you don't have democracy are Islamic countries and communist countries. So what I see happening now is part of God's plan to shake the tree of Russia, shake the tree of Ukraine, with all the pain that is involved for the Ukrainians and the Russians, in order for the Jews to realize they have no future staying in these countries, and the great beneficiary is Israel. Even my own wife, Rachel, my wife this June, it'll be 50 years, our golden anniversary. Even my wife, Rachel, was given to me as a gift from God because the Egyptian dictator, Abdel Nasser, expelled all the Jews from Egypt. And so the loss of Egypt is the gain of Avi Lipkin and the state of Israel. So what we see here in Israel is a population that has grown from 3 million when I came to Israel in 1968, went up to 5 million, then went up now 7.5 million Jews and Christians. And I'm predicting within the next few years a massive immigration to Israel of Jews and their Christian spouses and relatives because of the Israeli law of return. And I think we're going to double our population within a few years. And this is indeed a fulfillment of God's Bible prophecies.
You've been talking about possible immigration waves.
Yes.
Nobody expected the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. This is something that just pop out of nowhere, and suddenly we're seeing waves. This sudden invasion of immigrants, Jewish immigrants, into Israel that nobody expected. And when you talked about it, we always said that. What are you talking about? It's over. We're not going to have any more immigrations. The American Jews are not immigrating. The Russian Jews are very happy where they are, and the Ukrainians as well. And suddenly, God creates an event that nobody expected, and we are seeing this amazing influx of immigration. I want to move to another point. A very close relative of ours, just a few days ago, was very angry at Israel, a Jewish relative of ours, obviously. She was very angry that Israel was not opposing the Russian invasion into Ukraine. She actually said that she paralleled the Holocaust to what's going on in the Ukraine. And I want to ask you, why isn't Israel making a clear statement about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine?
Okay, well, of course, that's a fantastic question, which everyone asks. Israel has two very important policy decisions to make. Number one, I think most important of all, I don't want to say is the immigration, because that's number two. Number one is that Russia has its army in Syria in massive numbers now. The Russians are the guardians. They are the supporters of the Bashar al-Assad Shiite regime in Syria. Many Syrians were slaughtered. 500,000 Sunni Muslims were slaughtered by the Russians and the Shiites and the other minority groups under the Bashar al-Assad regime. I do have to go back a second to something very important. We have a very important group of people who live in Israel who are not Jewish or Christian. They are Druze, D-R-U-Z-E. The Druze are actually cousins of ours or half-brothers of ours. They are descended from Jethro. If you know your Bible, Jethro was offered by Moses to move with the 12 tribes to the land of Israel. In Josephus, it says that Jethro settled in the north of Israel in the Galilee. Jethro, actually, we know where he's buried. He's buried in Israel. He's buried near Tiberias. where the Battle of the Horns of Chittim took place. The Druze are very, very good soldiers. They're very good supporters of the State of Israel. But the Druze have fellow co-religionists in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And in those three countries, the Druze are loyal to the countries in which they live. They're loyal to the governments under which they serve. And what happened in Syria is that the Syrian majority were the Sunnis. The minority, 10% of the population was Shiite, 10% was Christian, 10% was Druze, and these 30% of minorities joined up with 20% of Sunnis who were part of the pyramid of power. In other words, it was basically 50-50 in the civil war in Syria. And the Druze are concentrated in the south of Syria. And what happened was ISIS and Al-Qaeda and these fanatic Sunni groups were about to close in on the Druze, mountain of the Druze in the south of Syria, and slaughter 700,000 Druze. Kind of a genocide for the Druze. And actually what happened, and this is true, is that the Druze came to Prime Minister Netanyahu, former Prime Minister Netanyahu, and said, listen, we're going to have a Holocaust. We Druze cannot stand for that. We have to go and we have to support our brethren in the south of Syria. So they said either Israel invades the south of Israel, or let
Syria.
Of Syria, thank you. Or Mr. Netanyahu, let us volunteer, let us go into Syria and to help our brethren in the south of Syria. And so Netanyahu went to Russia, met with Putin, and Putin, in coordination with Netanyahu, sent his army into Syria to save these minorities, because had the Sunnis won, all the Christians, 2 million of them, would have been slaughtered. All the Druze, 2 million, would have been slaughtered. The Shiites would have been slaughtered. Everyone would have been slaughtered by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And so actually, forgive me for taking the liberty to say it, in this case, the Russians were the good guys. They came in. I mean, there are no good guys in this civil war in Syria. But if we're talking about saving the Druze and the Christians and Shiites from total annihilation by the Sunnis, the Sunnis had to lose in this civil war. So today, the Russians have paid a very high price to help protect the Shiites, the Christians, and the Druze in Syria. And now what we're looking at is the possibility of a war with Iran. Okay, now I'm jumping to another subject. Iran is developing nuclear weapons. Iran is sending in terrorists, revolutionary guards they're called, into Syria, and they're going to attack Israel. They're going to support Hezbollah in Lebanon. And this is also a threat to Israel. So Israel, okay, now this is, I shouldn't be saying this the way I'm saying it, but Israel has a gentleman's agreement with the Russians. You know, that they will notify the Russians before any attack to ensure that the Russian soldiers are not there being killed when Israel targets Iranian Revolutionary Guards in Damascus or anywhere else in Syria or Lebanon. And so it is not in Israel's interest to kill Russian soldiers. It is not in Israel's interest to annoy the Russians or anger the Russians, because they are right there in Quneitra and on the Golan Heights. The Russian military is literally breathing down Israel's neck. This is not like somebody living, for example, in Indiana or Ohio or somewhere in the middle of the United States. Israel is a very small country. And so Israel has to be very careful in its behavior with the Russians. I think it was Putin, President Putin himself, who said that 3 atomic bombs, no more Israel. But Russia is so big that you could drop 100 atom bombs on Russia and Russia will still always continue to exist. So security-wise, it's very important for Israel not to go against Russia. In other words, I'm not saying we are allies of Russia. We are neutral in the war between Russia and Ukraine. And if there are those people in America who are upset with Israel, so that they can be upset because they don't care about Israel. They only care about their how shall I call it, ivory tower of academic
Morality.
liberal spiritual morality, totally devoid of Judaism or of Zionism, Israel has to take out for Israel. Look out for Israel. Another important point is Ukraine is fighting very valiantly, but Ukraine really is very, very much alone. And you don't see any countries going in to help the Ukraine physically with soldiers. The same with Israel. Israel, if there's a war, God forbid, with our neighbors, nobody's going to come in and help us. We have to fight all by ourselves. And we will. So it's very important to understand Israel's very sensitive situation with Russia. We are not enemies of Russia. We are not happy with the war in Ukraine. And in many, many ways, today in the news, if you listen, the last few days, Russia is very aggressive, criticizing Israel for helping not so-called Nazi Ukraine. Ukraine is not Nazi, but they're criticizing Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting by itself. Israel may have to fight by itself for its existence. And that's what the Independence Day is about. So, yesterday we were all mourning for the 24,000 Israelis who died fighting. And today we're all in the forest enjoying life with our children and grandchildren. We do this every year. It's kind of compulsive with the barbecue and all the food, tons of food. And Israel is very blessed. Israel is a paradise.
So let's talk a bit about that and end with an optimistic tone.
Yeah.
I hope an optimistic tone.
Amen.
But where do you see where Israel is 74 years old? Where do you see Israel in its 100th year?
Okay, now I'm not sure who's going to be watching or listening to this program, but for those of you Christians and Jews who know me, you know that I'm an extremely optimistic person. I believe in God, and when you believe in God, or the Christians say we know the back of the book. When you know the back of the book, you know that Israel will come out victorious in all of this. Now, what does victorious mean? I was talking before about immigration to the land of Israel. I was talking about Jews and in many ways Christians who are married to Jews or people who are not Christian or Jewish. The rabbis don't recognize them as Jewish. But when they move to Israel, they get army uniforms, they get guns, and they go into the army, and everyone works and pays taxes and votes, and we do have some intermarriage here. And we embrace all our brethren coming home from all over the world. I believe number one, our population is going to double and perhaps triple by the end of the century. Secondly, I believe another thing also. Now I'm going out on a limb, but maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. My son says I'm a prophet, but I'm only 300 years before my time. I said to my son, no, you're wrong. I'm 3 years before my time, not 300 years. ISIS today is presumably finished. It's not finished. ISIS is 100% alive. It is 100% Orthodox Islam. And they plan to overthrow the king of Saudi Arabia and the royal family of Saudi Arabia and reestablish the caliphate in Saudi. Their plan is to kill King Abdullah of Jordan, which does not make us happy, because King Abdullah, with whatever problems we may have with Jordan regarding the Temple Mount, King Abdullah today is a neighbor living in peace with us. I don't want to say an ally, but there's a lot of cooperation with the Jordanians. ISIS doesn't like it. ISIS says we're going to kill King Abdullah, we're going to kill the royal family, and we're going to establish the caliphate in Saudi and in Jordan. Now, if and when Putin is removed from power, and if and when the new leadership says, you know what, we're wasting our time in Syria, let's get out, ISIS comes back to Syria, kills the Christians, 2 million of them, kills the Druze, 2 million of them, kills the Shiites. And you know what's going to happen? If the Russians pull out of Syria, then Israel will have to go in to southern Syria to defend these minorities, especially the Druze and the Christians. So what I'm predicting is, I see, as you asked, what's the future? Are we optimistic? It says in the Bible that our borders are going to be from the Nile to the Euphrates, from Lebanon to the Great Desert. Great Desert is Saudi Arabia. There is no other way to interpret it. So I believe that our population is going to double and triple our borders are going to double and triple, and these will be the borders of the Messiah. We will have Jewish and Christian people living in our lands. My personal suggestion is to establish Christian federal autonomous republics in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Saudi, keeping the land of Israel itself with a Jewish majority, but bringing in Western pro-Judeo-Christian people, establish democracies. With our wonderful technology, I want to desalinate the waters of the seas around us. I want to establish renewable energy, electricity, with using the water of the desalination to turn the whole desert green. And I think, God said at the very beginning of Genesis, he said to Adam and Eve, you're going to tend my garden. And I think the time has come to tend the garden, create the garden, and tend the garden in all of these countries surrounding Israel, and that the Messiah's kingdom, when the Messiah shows up, probably at the end of this process, when all the Jews and Christians are together in fellowship, and we turn the deserts green, I'm a very optimistic person. I think that this will be the greatest time in human history.
Thank you for joining us for Israel's 74th Independence Day. This is Aaron Lipkin and Avi Lipkin saying shalom from the land of Israel. And we hope to see you soon in our next videos. Shalom.